resources so that if you do have a lot of questions about what cyanobacteria are and the concerns about them, the resources that I'll provide, you can learn more about it. So tonight's focus is just to talk about what we did to change the program in 2025 and the status of blooms in 2025. All right, so just a little bit of background first before we dive in. So cyanobacteria are a very normal part of our freshwater systems, and that doesn't mean that they're good or bad. It just means that they are part of the system. Most of our water bodies in New Hampshire have a little bit of cyanobacteria in it, just a couple cells or a couple colonies, and that is what we've been seeing for years and years. What we get concerned about is when conditions are right, we have blooms form where cyanobacteria are not just a background species anymore. They are the dominant species, and they show up as scums on the shoreline or scums across the lake, or give us that snow globe looking appearance in the water body. And of course, when we have blooms, our biggest concern is that those blooms are toxic. So cyanobacteria themselves are not toxic all the time, but there are times when they can become toxic. And that is where we have, excuse me, we have public health concerns, and we start to worry about human health and the health of our little critters that we have in the lake, and also our pets and livestock and other things. So cyanobacteria can produce various toxins. There's a whole range of toxins that are out there, and those toxins can have various effects on humans. So with that context in mind, I will talk about summer 2025 by the numbers. So this summer, we had 515 reports of cyanobacteria in various water bodies across the state. 499 of those were counted in our laboratory. So we had samples that were delivered to us. The other ones, we either just had photographs or just reports of them. After we looked at those samples in the microscope, 265 of those reports made it to our Healthy Swimming Mapper. And a lot of you know what our Healthy Swimming Mapper is, but it's an online platform that allows us to share information about blooms, and I'll have some links to that later. So we reported those out as blooms. A total of 66 water bodies in New Hampshire did have blooms, and of those that did have documented blooms, there were 7 watches and 6 warnings on water bodies. And I'm going to dive into that a little bit deeper, but that's by the numbers. So for 2025, over the course of last winter and before we got into the growing season this year, we were working on program changes and updates, and it covered a range of things from signage that we have that we share. Our Healthy Swimming Mapper was updated. Warnings and watches and the context for them and how we use them were updated. Our electronic messaging about blooms was updated. And we developed a self-risk assessment so that we can help you as the lake user know when it's safe to use that water body. So I will share information on each of those. So some of you have already received this. If you have not, we do have more available, but this is our new sign. Some of you may remember that when we had blooms in the past, we had yellow signs for watches and red signs for warnings. We have eliminated those signs, and we've gone with this one instead. And the messaging on this sign is we would like everyone to look at the water when you get to a water body or when you leave your house and go up to your shorefront. We want you to check our Healthy Swim Mapper so that you can see if the water body of interest has a documented bloom on it. And if you do see a bloom, we'd like you to report it. And we would like you to do all this before you go swimming or fishing or boating, or let your pets in or your kids in or your grandkids in, just so that you can be as safe as possible in case there is a bloom and in case it is producing a toxin. So we thought this sign was a little bit more informative. These signs are intended to be kept up at all times, just to alert boaters at beaches or boat launches that these are the activities that you should do, and report anything that you may see. So again, we do have these signs available. So you just can reach out to me or to our office and we can get these to you. For our Healthy Swimming Mapper updates, we have new symbols that we're using on our map, and this QR code right here gets you to our mapper. The symbols are these triangles that are black, orange, and red. The gray dots in the background just are our swim beaches across the state that we monitor for bacteria. So those are all grayed out right now. But these are currently the lakes in New Hampshire that do still have blooms. So as you can see, the growing season is not ended, and we do still have active blooms that are going on some level. So now we're using these different colored triangles. In the past, and this is looking at an old mapper image, we used to have the entire water body indicated by color if there was a bloom. So if there was an alert or a watch going on, we would have the water body colored out in orange. And then if it is a watch, like a high level advisory, we would have the water body shaded out in red. So that was water body wide. And not all blooms are water body wide. So we wanted to be a little bit more distinct in how we do our marking of blooms. So these new symbols indicate various things. The black triangles mean that we received a photograph and it looked like a cyanobacteria bloom. We didn't have a sample, but based on the photograph, we suspect it is a bloom. So we put a black triangle on the map. If a sample was collected and the cyanobacteria density was lower, our threshold in New Hampshire for blooms is 70,000 cells per milliliter. If it was lower than that, we would put an orange triangle. And the same thing for the red. If it was collected and we counted the cells and they were greater than 70,000 cells per milliliter, we would put a red triangle. So that is what the new triangles on the map mean. When you go into our mapper, you actually see this listing so that you know what those different colors mean. And I just want to walk you through that and provide a little bit of context. So the last few years, when we started using warnings and watches, we would have a report of a scum or a little ribbon of growth on the shoreline, and it could have just been around somebody's dock. And that may have triggered that water body as a whole to be listed as orange or red for the entire water body blooming, which was highly misleading. So what we wanted to start to do was pinpoint where we're seeing these blooms. So some of these triangles, some of these lakes may have multiple triangles on them in different colors. So I'll just show you a couple of those situations. So this example is from earlier this month. This is Franklin Pierce Lake, and they were reporting little patches of blooms on a couple little areas in one part of the lake. So we had a volunteer who reported a shoreline bloom. It was a percentage of the water body, a small percentage of the water body. And they collected a sample and we analyzed it and confirmed it was cyanobacteria. But because it was so isolated, we just put a point on a map and that was it. This was just a report of a bloom. The cell count was well below our threshold and it wasn't a concern. Well, it was something that we were worried about, but it wasn't a lake-wide concern. So we would put that up as a report and label it as black. This one is Lake Conasauqua in Moultonborough. They had a couple locations where they had higher density blooms occurring and little patches of blooms, but you can see it was fairly isolated. The red means that the counts were greater than our threshold. We did have some other spots, though, that were mixed in with lower counts. And because of the isolated nature of this, and this is a really big lake, the rest of the lake was unimpacted. We indicated that this one was a watch because we did have a few locations where there were higher counts, but not all over the lake. So this one got a yellow triangle, and we actually did list this one as a watch for our Healthy Swim Mapper. This one had a lake-wide bloom. As you can see, the volunteer was standing on their dock taking pictures, but you can see the bloom is extending across their lake well offshore. It's a high-density bloom. This is Tucker Pond in Salisbury. And they were boating on the water body. They said that the bloom covered 75% or more of the water body. I was out on this water body and I can document that it was very widespread and it was a solid surface scum. So this received some red dots and an orange, I'm sorry, red triangles and an orange triangle. And this one actually did fall into a warning level for our healthy swim mapper. So in the past, like I said, we would have a tiny little bit of cyanobacteria and that would trigger an entire leak to be marked as blooming. So with these triangles, we're trying to be a little bit more precise with how we're marking our water bodies to provide everyone with more information and not marking a whole water body as blooming. So that it's just more descriptive. Of course, all of you that have been on water bodies where there are blooms know that blooms move when the wind blows and move with the flow of water. So we do encourage you, if you do see that happening, to report that to us with our bloom report form, which I'll mention in a couple minutes, so that we can update the mapper with the most current information. So those are resources that are out there. Because of these changes that we did to the program, you can see that this year in 2025, we had a lot fewer watches or warnings that we issued on our water bodies. These are the years here from 2021 through 2024 where we were listing more and more water bodies as a watch or a warning because of those blooms. And a lot of those they were embellished because they were very small blooms and not lake-wide blooms. So we did have a number of fewer watches and warnings that were lake-wide, but we did still have some that we thought were worthy of issuing a bigger warning on than just points on a map. I can tell you, though, that 2025 did still have the same number of water bodies that were reporting blooms. But just because the number of watches and warnings was low, it looks like there weren't as many. But if you look at the actual water bodies that were reporting blooms, they were around the same range as we've seen in the last several years. So there weren't a lot of changes there. It's just the way we're marking blooms now, so it's much more precise. So I just wanted to clarify any questions that were out there as to how we are changing the marking of our water bodies based on blooms. So that was one of our bigger updates. We did add more questions to the bloom report form. And when I share these slides with New Hampshire Lakes, you'll have access to all these QR codes. And I've got some links embedded in some of my other slides so that you can access these readily. So in the past, if anyone would see a bloom, they could go on our bloom report form and type in some information, upload some pictures, and then once they sent that in, we would get the update about that bloom. But that didn't tell us a lot about how widespread the blooms were and where they were. So we added more questions to the bloom report form, which yes, made it longer, but also provided a lot more information to us to make a better informed decision. So we wanted to know frame of reference. Are you observing this from your dock or a beach, from the shoreline somewhere, or were you out on your boat and you saw the bloom from that perspective? We also wanted to gain an understanding of what percentage of the water body you were seeing this bloom in. Was your point of view, like I said, just from your dock and you think the bloom is only an isolated location, or were you on your boat and you can say that you saw 75% of the lake or all of the lake and you saw the bloom covering half the lake or 25% of the lake or all of the lake? So this just lets you provide us more information. And then we also wanted to know more about what the bloom looked like. Was it a scum on the surface? Was it close to shore? Was the bloom in the water column? Was it both? So that you can, again, provide more information to us so that we can then make a better informed decision about how we treat the bloom on that water body or how we list it. So bloom report forms are a little bit longer with more detailed questions, but we found that that worked out really well this summer. We also had some changes to our cyanobacteria bloom emails. We used to do statewide weekly email updates about all the blooms that were available, but we were finding that that was really redundant because you could go on the mapper and you could see where the blooms were occurring during a given day or a given week. So we decided we weren't going to do weekly statewide bloom update emails anymore. However, we are still doing water body specific emails, and the QR code that's on here allows you to go in and sign up for an email when a bloom has been reported on your water body. So any level bloom, any detection of cyanobacteria at a level that's close to the threshold or above the threshold, you will definitely get an email that says, we're aware of something going on this water body. Please keep an eye out. Please use good decision making before going in and using that water body. So these emails are still available. If you have a favorite lake or the lake that you live on, we encourage you to sign up for these emails. And then the other thing that we did was we came up with a cyanobacteria self-risk assessment. And there are 2 videos that we posted on our website that talk you through what you should be looking for. And the question is, would you jump in that lake? If you saw something like this picture, would you jump in that lake? This is a cyanobacteria bloom, and this is what we call that snow globe snow globe type appearance, where it's in the water column and there are flecks all over. And some places you see it might start to be coming up and scumming on the surface too. So we just want people to look and make an informed decision about what the water body looks like. If the water body's clear, there's no problem. You can jump in and have no worries about the cyanobacteria bloom. Even if there's a tiny bloom on a section of shoreline across the lake, if your area looks clear, you are in the clear, you're good to go. But if you see anything in the water that looks like it might be a bloom, we do encourage you to maybe think again about going in and then report it to us so we can check it out and let you know what's going on. So these 2 links here get you to our YouTube channel for DES, and you can take a look at those. So some of the reasons for the changes that we made during the season, just for some context, there's currently no uniform federal regulation in the United States for cyanobacteria recreational waters, just recommendations. So we just wanted to make sure that we were giving the most accurate information about blooms that were out there in the best way that we could. And knowing of all the little spots around the lake that are blooming is much more informative than giving you a full lake that's marked out where you may not see a bloom and you're questioning what's going on. So all those points should be helpful. And it's a little confusing because some states use cell counts like New Hampshire does for blooms, but some states, about half of the states, use cyanotoxin concentrations. So they actually measure the toxins real time and then issue advisories based on the toxins. New Hampshire doesn't have the ability to do that. So we use cell counts as a more of a real-time count. And the assumption is the more cell counts there are, if that cyanobacteria is producing a toxin, it could be more harmful or potentially higher concentrations of toxins in the water. So it's easier and quicker to count. It takes a lot longer to do cyanotoxin testing with accuracy, so the cell counts can be done much quicker. Looking around the United States and actually even looking at all of the Canadian provinces, the thresholds for action are widely varied. Some states and provinces look at visual observations, and if they see any degree of bloom, they put an advisory on the water body. And again, some of them base their decisions based on a number of cell counts, and cell counts are different between every state that uses cell counts. And cyanotoxins, but their concentrations are not well defined. So different states use different thresholds for concentrations. So until there is a specific national guidance for how all states should be doing cyanobacteria advisories or thresholds for action, every state is kind of doing something different, and we're trying to fine tune how New Hampshire is doing things. Also, terminology varies widely. Different states are using watch or warning or alert, a closure, caution, advisory. It gets very confusing, and it's not similar across state boundaries. It's not similar across our small states in New England, let alone bigger states across the country. So right now, we're moving towards just using the reports of blooms and telling you where the blooms are, and a little less of watches and warnings, just because some of those the terminology is so varied. So in New Hampshire, we're trying to provide more specific information on the different locations and the severity of the blooms by the points and the colors of the points. We're trying to provide a platform for you guys to report out when you see blooms so that you can inform us. We can do site inspections, you can supply samples. We update our healthy swimming mapper usually multiple times during the day so that that information is current daily. And we try to empower you guys with those points on the map to make the best decision possible about what's going on in your water body. And we do encourage you guys to do that self-risk assessment that I said. We can't be on every water body in New Hampshire every day or a couple times a day. So we are relying on your great eyes and ears to report back to us about what you're seeing so that we can then respond and provide accurate information. So those are the updates that we had through 2025 for program updates and cyanobacteria activity. So knowing that we had the same number of water bodies reporting blooms this year, we're not seeing a continued increasing trend. We actually had fewer lake-wide blooms this year than we did in past years, and some lower density blooms. We still had a couple that were really widespread and really high density. And those are the ones where we did think that it was worth putting a warning on a water body. And we're going to continue to use that discretion that's available to us. I do want to bring your attention to something that we are seeing more and more of, though. We are starting to see benthic cyanobacteria or bottom growing cyanobacteria. We actually just started doing some sampling for these this summer, and the University of New Hampshire is going to be doing some toxicity testing on these. Many of you know Dr. Amanda McQuaid, who is one of our state experts on cyanobacteria. She works with Jim Haney, who's now retired, who is also one of our state experts. And they are looking at this as something that's more evolving. And we're hearing from you guys on some of the lakes across the state where these blooms are on the bottom. They're not necessarily washing up as a scum, and they're not floating through the water column. So when you look down on your lake bottom and you see something that looks like usually a blackish or dark greenish mat on the sediments, it could potentially be a cyanobacteria. And I'm not talking about those big bright green clouds that look like cotton candy on the bottom. These are flatter mats, sometimes a little bit chunky, sometimes falling into the ripples or just accumulating. Certainly, our lakes are settling basins for a lot of debris, leaf litter, pine needles that turn black. So taking a closer look at it and seeing, does it look like algae or does it look like a pile of pine needles? Sometimes it takes a little bit of investigative work, but we are starting to see these, and these do tend to persist a little bit longer than water column blooms. A couple of these were found on Lake Winnipesaukee up in Moultonborough near a children's camp, and they had to restrict access to one of their swim beaches for much of the summer because that benthic bloom persisted. So not only are you looking for scums and snow globes, but you're looking for mats on the bottom of the lake as well. Cyanobacteria are pretty tricky. We don't know a lot about the toxicity of these yet. We're not advising disturbing them at this point. Hopefully this winter we'll be coming up with some guidance for how to deal with these mats if you are seeing them. But hopefully some of the data that's going to come out of UNH will inform us if we are starting to see toxicity in these beds as well. So just keep an eye out for those and report those with the bloom report form if you do start to see them. And I know some of you already have. So now I'd like to talk about some of the HABS resources that are available. So with the age of technology that advanced during COVID, we started recording a lot of our presentations. Just like New Hampshire Lakes is recording this webinar tonight, we have a catalog or a playlist of cyanobacteria recordings that we've had over the years. So the QR code here will get you to our YouTube channel for cyanobacteria. And like I said, I'm not going through all the nitty gritty about cyanobacteria, biology, ecology, et cetera tonight, But you can do that at your leisure if you like, and just go through these webinars whenever you would like to. So we keep those up on our website and they are available. I want to call out 4 of them in particular. Last winter and into this spring, we did a 4-part webinar series that was coming out of our statewide cyanobacteria plan. One of the goals of our cyanobacteria plan was to do more outreach and education about cyanobacteria. And this webinar series was part of that. So we had a presentation from different people talking about different aspects of how to understand the cyanobacteria plan that we have for New Hampshire. Kate Hastings, our former cyanobacteria program coordinator, did a really good presentation about cyanobacteria in New Hampshire and what you can expect to see in your water bodies. We had specific tips for homeowners for lake protection to help you get informed about how to do actions on your shorefront to help protect the lake. And then taking that up one more level, we had a webinar on protection actions for municipalities. And it included things like zoning overlays and other protective measures within watersheds. So this 4-part series is excellent. There were a lot of really good presentations, and I encourage you to take a look. So a little bit about cyanobacteria mitigation, because we get this question a lot. And if you have a bloom, people want to get rid of it quickly and make sure it never happens again. And that's tricky. We have blooms in lakes that are very low nutrients where we don't expect to have them. We have blooms in very nutrient-rich systems where we do tend to expect to have them. And they're hard to manage. Every one of them responds a little bit differently. Sometimes they mitigate themselves and go away and never come back. Sometimes they're lake-wide blooms that last months through the summer. So having a real good idea of what's going on in the watershed and in the lake can help to lead to some solutions. But I just want to talk about what some of those solutions are and some of the resources that are out there. So I'll start with the cyanobacteria statewide plan and then talk about the Cyanobacteria Mitigation Fund and other grant funds that are out there. So in 2022, legislation was passed that directed DES to do more about cyanobacteria, and a panel was created, an advisory committee in 2023 that really dove into this issue. And the panel had a lot of different stakeholder members that were involved in it. And they worked over the course of a year to identify a plan for how to step up actions in New Hampshire to address cyanobacteria. And in that plan, it's a written plan, and the QR code over on the right here is a link to that plan if you would like to read it in its entirety. But summarizing that plan identified 4 strategies for really honing in on cyanobacteria in New Hampshire. The first one is develop policies and practices to reduce, control, and prevent nutrient inputs that cause cyanobacteria. And that gets to a lot of the watershed-driven nutrient loading, sediment loading that could eventually lead to a bloom. The second strategy is advancing education and outreach efforts. That 4-part webinar series was part of that initiative. Talks like this and other outreach that we're doing, the new signs also address that. Enhanced monitoring, both in the field and in the laboratory, were also good ideas that came out of that plan. And then strategy 4 was identifying best practices for public drinking water supplies. So we do have in our drinking water program a staffer who focuses in on cyanobacteria, and she works with drinking water supplies to educate them about how to look for blooms. They do studies of the drinking water supply to see if they are blooming. There are grants available to drinking water supplies to help do studies and to help mitigate some of those blooms. So we do have that element that's up and running and evolving over time as well. So the statewide strategy is really useful, and I do encourage you to take a look at it. And we do revisit that often to help guide our messaging and our activities on the state level. So some of you may have heard about the Cyanobacteria Mitigation Fund. This is one of the outcomes of the Cyanobacteria plan, and we didn't have dedicated funding previously to put towards cyanobacteria mitigation. We did have some money that came available as a one-time legislative appropriation from the state's general fund, and that was back in 2023. And then we also did have some money that came from the American Rescue Plan Act, or the ARPA funds, that were given to New Hampshire for what they were calling boots on the ground projects. And I'll talk about where that money went. We did create statutory authority for giving out these grant funds. Then we also came up with rules and then a whole bunch of other elements to implement this program. We wanted to make sure that this money went to projects that were worthy. The worst thing that we can do is be very quick to react and do a Band-Aid approach at fixing a bloom. Blooms are a sign of a problem in the lake, and that is typically nutrient loading or sediment loading, internal loading. And to strategically manage cyanobacteria, you really have to have a good understanding of the watershed and the lake, and you need to have a plan of how best to mitigate all those sources of nutrients, including in-lake management, if it's appropriate. And I do know that a lot has been discussed lately about aluminum treatments that we're doing in our lakes. We've recently had 3 aluminum treatments take place on water bodies in New Hampshire in the last 5 years or so. And those projects are very big and involved and also very expensive. And they also, all 3 of them did their due diligence to get to the point where an aluminum treatment made sense. So that's why I caution that every lake is different, and every response and every remediation action is going to be different for every lake. It's not a one size fits all. So this money is very strategically being used so that we can make the best difference in the water bodies that really need it. So taking a look at the Cyanobacteria Mitigation Fund grant awards, we've awarded 2 grants so far. One was for Lake Conasauqua for an aluminum treatment, which dealt with a lot of the internal sources of nutrient loading in that lake. And then we also awarded a $50,000 grant to Province Lake in Effingham so that they could do some stormwater mitigation. So that was more of a watershed-based activity. The balance of that grant fund at this point is about $200,000. And some of that money was earmarked just for supplies and equipment for toxicity testing and administrative costs for the program. So we do still have a little bit left to go, but it's not going to go far when you look at the price tags of $500,000 projects. So that's why we're being so strategic with this money. Also, like I mentioned, we did receive some American Rescue Plan Act money from the federal government. That money was earmarked for cyanobacteria mitigation projects, and these 3 projects were the outcomes of some of that spending. Tucker Pond in Salisbury and Warner is doing some watershed erosion and stormwater mitigation work. We did a Partridge Lake in Littleton aluminum treatment this summer, and Province Lake received another grant for a small revegetation project along one of their beaches where they had a lot of erosion happening. Further, New Hampshire Lakes was awarded an additional $500,000 to put out to subgrantees to work on projects related to cyanobacteria mitigation that were identified through a watershed-based approach. So we did have a good amount of ARPA money that came in. All of that has been earmarked, and that's gone at this point. So the wrap up of that, like I said, we do have eligibility requirements for groups that are interested in receiving funding, and the request for receiving money is online. What we really want to see is that, have you had a watershed-based plan done for your water body? Have you identified the sources of nutrients to your lake from the watershed and from within the lake? And have you addressed some of your watershed-based sources of nutrients so that we have an idea that you are committed to these projects and could move a project forward if you did receive grant funds? So that money is available. Looking ahead though, like I said, we have about $230,000 that's available. That's it. We don't have any money that's coming our way. The money that we had is not renewed annually. It's not continuously appropriated. We don't see any more money coming our way. There is possible funding that could come from a House bill that's currently in the legislature. It's House Bill 105, and it looks to create a lake license plate, and the money from the sales of that license plate and then the annual renews of that license plate would go directly into the Cyanobacteria Mitigation Fund. That bill was put into the legislature last year. It passed the House, it moved to the Senate. It was retained by the Senate last year, but they are going to have an executive session on that bill on October 23rd. So we'll find out the fate of that bill later this month. But again, right now, there are no additional resources that are coming to this program. We're looking for them, but we just don't have a big pot of money that's available. And then for the program itself, we always look for continuous process improvement. And like I said, we did some evaluations last winter to refine the program. We'll be doing the same this winter. We do encourage your feedback about the program. Some of the things that we need to do, number one, we've been running the Cyanobacteria program without a program coordinator since February. Our past coordinator was decided to stay home after having her second child. So we've been program coordinatorless. We've been in a state hiring freeze for a while, and we've been unable to fill that position. We are talking about trying to fill that soon, but right now we've been sort of holding the program together with staff that have been assisting with cyanobacteria counts and keeping up with things. So we're really looking to hopefully fill that position. We are considering eliminating the terms watch and warning and just going with these triangles like I talked about earlier. And if we do that, we're going to change the watches and warnings list here to just a running list of those reports that we receive and when we receive them so that you can see those all. They'll link to these triangles. You can also click on those triangles and find out more information about those water bodies. But we would keep a running list of what's going on over on the right, so the mapper could change. And then we want to continue to carry out elements of the statewide cyanobacteria plan, more education and outreach, more monitoring. We want to continue to try to find sources of funding so we can mitigate blooms. And we'll see what else comes up from our program evaluations, and maybe our future program coordinator will have some ideas that they bring to the program as well. But with that, I am happy to take any questions that may have come up during the presentation. And thank you for your time.
Excellent, Amy. Thank you. I know even though we are in close contact with you all at DES, there was some information in there that certainly helped make that messaging more clear to me even. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
There are a few questions in here, so I'll start here at the top about the cell count. Todd is wondering, you mentioned that the 70,000 cell count is considered the limit. Can any toxicity occur at lower counts or be a concern?
That's a great question. And yes, we have found that lower density blooms certainly could have toxins associated with them. Really high density blooms in the millions counts might not have any toxins at all. So cyanobacteria are very tricky. And that's why we caution if you see anything in the water, we would recommend that you maybe stay out of it until it looks clear, or keep your pets or your kids or grandkids out. So like I said, the thresholds are all over the place for every state, be it counts or cyanotoxins, and we just don't have the ability to do daily cyanotoxin testing, so we go by the counts. But if you see something, it might just be a good idea to stay out until it looks clear.
Yeah. Speaking of staying out, and unless it looks clear, the photo that you shared of the would you jump into this, do you happen to know if that reached that cell count?
That definitely did. That was a Delicospermum bloom on Lock Lake, and it definitely did exceed the threshold. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, Susan shared some of her concerns with people, not having enough information when they go to the beach, and wondering if you're still going to be putting up those watch and warning signs, which I think you said that you're not planning on using those old signs. And are you concerned that people will know to check the healthy swimming mapper? And I will just say from our standpoint, I think you talked about this a lot, that education is just important, and we're doing what we have the capacity to do on our end, as well as I know DES is, but do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the education and outreach piece is huge. And this summer, because we just didn't have the fullest capacity possible, we weren't putting that messaging out as much. So I'm very thankful to you for scheduling this webinar so that we could get this word out more about blooms and those visual observations. We are not going to be using the yellow and red signs anymore because I'm not sure that we are going to be issuing watches and warnings anymore, which those signs were tied to. We are moving much more to a healthy, I'm sorry, a self-risk assessment so that people can look at the water on whatever water body they visit or that they live on and make an informed decision for themselves. If the water looks icky, don't go in it. Give it a day or two to clear, let the wind shift it. Um, like I said, we can't be everywhere at once. And we don't want to be putting signs up all the time when they may not be necessarily accurate. So that's why we put these cyanobacteria signs up that are new with QR code to get to the healthy swimming mapper so people can make that decision based on what they see on the mapper. Understanding that people that still have flip phones won't be able to get online and see what the bloom report is saying. But I think just visual observation of the water and just making sure it looks clean before they jump in is the easiest thing that they can do. You don't need to be told that the water looks gross. You can make that determination on your own and say, I don't really want to go in that today.
Absolutely. Betty is, well, just sort of made a comment, and I'm wondering if you could talk on this a little bit about the trained lake volunteers like they have in Vermont at Lake Champlain that are helping report cyanobacteria blooms, because that's come up recently in our office as well.
So I'm not as familiar with the trained volunteers that are in Vermont. That's something that I'll definitely take a look at. But I know many of you are lake residents, many of you are volunteers, and you do keep an eye out, and many of you are responsible for a lot of the bloom reports that we do receive. So we do encourage you to continue to do that. You guys are the best eyes on the water body because you know when something looks different. So short of running a volunteer program specifically looking for blooms, we just ask anyone to keep an eye out and report when they do see blooms. I will follow up and check out what Vermont is doing and see if that's something that might fit for New Hampshire. But that bloom report form is accessible to anybody on any water body at any time. So we do encourage you to use that.
Excellent. Bruce is wondering if you have a comment on the Lake George, New York recent study. I'm not familiar with this. I'm not sure if you are.
I am not familiar with the Lake George study on cyanobacteria. I'm aware of some of the other work they've been doing with other things like invasive species control, but I would be not fully informed to answer something along those lines.
Yeah. Okay, Betty's asking if cyanobacteria is found across the lake, but none where you can see it. What's the protocol?
So if you know that there's a bloom, you have a triangle on one part of your water body that indicates a bloom is there. It might just be there. The wind may have shifted it. So anytime, any water body, just look in the water. If you see anything that looks like a bloom, we recommend not going in, sort of a look before you leap type of thing. But if it's an isolated bloom in another part of the water body, it does not affect other portions of the water body. It's just where you actually see that visible bloom.
Okay. Lee has asked what method is used for toxicity testing?
So that is a laboratory-based method. The best method that's available is it's called an ELISA test, and When we see a bloom, we collect samples, and the reason why the analysis takes so long to do is because we have to break up those cyanobacteria cells. So our samples go through freeze-thaw cycles to break up the cells, and then we actually run them on a plate reader with different reagents. So it is a little bit more involved. It's a benchtop chemistry analysis. It takes a lot of time to run and get right. So we do it in our lab, and other laboratories do it. You can send samples out for analysis too, but just the method that we use just takes a long time because of that freeze thaw cycle and then setting up all the runs.
Okay, David's asking, given that blooms are still occurring, is it still valuable to do a phytoplankton study at this time of year?
So like I said, cyanobacteria are a normal part of any background phytoplankton population. I've been doing uh, plankton analyses for 27 years now, and I can tell you that I do see cyanobacteria in almost every lake sample that I look at. When you start to have a problem is when you start to see it in the water column and scumming. So I would say that is the easiest way to determine if you have an issue. Now, with that said, cyanobacteria can live on the bottom of the lake, on top of the lake sediments. They can microstratify in the water column at different depths. So if you do a net haul, you'll probably get some somewhere in there, but they are most harmful when they're up at the surface because that means all the cells are breaking. And if they are producing a toxin, when you're breaking those cells open, that toxin is being released. So that is the most concerning portion of a bloom is when it's up at the top or in the water column and you can see it. If it's out of sight, if it's another part of the lake, it's not a concern or a direct concern.
Okay. Okay, we have someone asking, what would the annual amount of funding generated from the license plate fee be? Is it sufficient for meaningful change? You might not know the answer to that.
I don't know that anyone knows the answer to that yet.
Yeah, right.
We don't know how many license plates will be sold. There are other license plates in New Hampshire, like the Moose Plate and the State Park Plate, that do draw other revenues or veterans plates or other special plates. So what the slice of pie is from that sale, we don't know. Will it be enough to sustain the program? I doubt it. I think we definitely need to work on diversifying our revenue stream for cyanobacteria mitigation. A lot of these projects, as you saw, are a couple hundred to $500,000 each for a leak. So that's a lot of money. And we definitely need to find a way to fund mitigation projects so that they are sustainable in the long term and they're diversified enough so that we have enough revenue each year to help the leaks that really need it. I don't anticipate that we're going to be doing multiple projects a year. These projects do take time and they do get phased in over time. But I think that at least $1 million a year would be a good start to helping to mitigate some of those issues. And I don't think the license plate alone would do that, but I do think that that's a nice dedicated resource to helping to contribute to the issue.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay, Norman is asking, saying that people at Province Lake are concerned that the wake boats are the primary cause of this year's lake-wide bloom. What are your thoughts?
So I was on Province Lake after a rainstorm last year, and I can tell you that a lot of those tributaries turn the lake into chocolate milk. So there are watershed-based problems that are contributing to nutrient loading to Province Lake, despite a lot of the watershed work that's been done. So more work does need to be done in the watershed to stabilize those streams. But lake use can do it. I mean, if you have larger boats of any type, not just wake boats, but any power boat that is going fast across a lake that's shallow, Province Lake is 14 feet deep at max, maybe 15 feet. That's a lot of zone where a strong engine can stir up lake bottom and resuspend nutrients or sediments that could then drive a bloom. So there are a lot of contributing factors. Watershed use and in-lake uses definitely all contribute. Different times of year, they might contribute differently, but I think we need to sort of soul search on our lakes and look at all those identifying causes. I don't think we're going to be able to go back in time and get rid of all the houses and all of the development and all the boater use of our lakes, but we do need to be good stewards of our lakes no matter where we are or what we're doing or how far from the lake we are or if we're right on the lake. So I wouldn't pinpoint one user group. I would say that a lot of our lakes across the state are dealing with competing uses that are impacting our lakes as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Edwards asks, do benthics, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, cyanobacteria prefer a particular type of substrate?
So you would think that they would really like organic substrates because of all the nutrient richness that those tend to have. But I have observed them on an array of sediments. I've actually seen them a lot on sandy substrates. So I think that anywhere where they can get a foothold and grow into a larger patch is fair game. Organic sediments do tend to have a lot more nutrients associated with them. But if you look at a sand grain underneath the microscope, it has a lot of sides, and those sides can hold a lot of nutrients attached to it that could feed growth. So I would say I wouldn't rule out any area at this point.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. Julia is asking, there have been some concerns regarding the incidence of neurological disease secondary to cyanobacteria exposure. What information might you have regarding research regarding cyanobacteria and health
Mhm.
concerns?
Yeah, there have definitely been some linkages with cyanobacteria toxins and ALS disorders and potentially Parkinson's disease. Dr. Elijah Stommel and Dr. Tracy Collar, both at Dartmouth College, have done a lot of this work, and they work with patients that do have ALS disorders. And there's an amino acid that's in the brains of patients that have had ALS disorders that are very similar to the amino acids that are in cyanobacteria. And there do tend to be hot spots. Lake Muskoma and Enfield is one of them. There are spots on some of the Great Lakes that do have areas of higher populations of patients with ALS disorders or other neurological diseases that could be tied to cyanobacteria. We do know that consuming cyanobacteria can cause problems. We do know that cyanobacteria is aerosolized and people can breathe them in. They've been found in lung tissue. So there are a lot of means of getting these toxins into our bodies, which could then make changes to different physiological portions of our bodies that could lead to issues, including neurological issues. Cyanotoxins are known liver toxins and neurotoxins. So yeah, the risk is there, and the data from researchers that do that type of work indicate that there could be a linkage.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple people here are kind of asking about testing methods, or is there a good web resource about a flow chart for distinguishing between normal algae bloom and a cyanobacteria bloom? And
Mhm.
a couple people asking about the stick test and how reliable that is.
Yeah, so there are a lot of resources online. If you watch some of those webinars that I showed you the links to, those provide some really good pictures of what to look for. One of the things that we're seeing is that cyanobacteria are manifesting in varied ways now. Before they used to be like a blue-greenish scum. Now they're that snow globe appearance. Now there are yellow blooms, there are black blooms. Um, Anything that looks different, please report it to us. We're happy to take a look at it underneath the microscope. When it comes to the stick test, all of you on your lakes have seen those big clouds of bright green algae. They look like clouds, or I call them cotton candy because they look stringy and big and puffy. That's usually filamentous green algae that is not harmful. That's where the stick test comes in. If you take a stick and you kind of push it through the blob and you pull it out, you might have stringy, slimy stuff hanging off from your stick. We do have a fact sheet about filamentous green algae on our website. Um, but that, sometimes that algae might be really thin or not as slimy, and it may not stick to the stick. So yeah, anytime you see anything suspicious, report it through the Bloom report form. We'll look at the photos and let you know if it's something that's of concern, and we can take a look at it for you. Really, the only way to be positive is a microscopic ID to know what's in there. A couple examples of that is those filamentous green blooms may have cyanobacteria stuck in them. Pollen in the spring, that lovely yellow scum that we see, as all the pine pollen accumulates on our lake, we're starting to see that there's a really thin film of cyanobacteria stuck underneath the pollen bloom. So, or the pollen scum. So looks can be deceiving. You think it's pollen, but underneath it could be cyanobacteria. So microscopic ID is the best way to go. Collect a sample when you see it, preferably wearing gloves, and use some kind of bottle that's clean, and then just store that sample and get it to us as quickly as possible. Wash your hands after you collect it, and then we'll take a look at the sample and let you know what it is.
Excellent. Okay, we are right at 8 o'clock. There's a couple, though, I think you could probably answer quickly that are sort of related. And just, is there a correlation between cyanobacteria blooms and what we are seeing? I know you guys also test for E. coli, or someone also said geese, they're pooping in the lake. So
Mhm.
any correlation there?
So, we're not necessarily seeing a correlation between E. coli or other bacteria and cyanobacteria. However, with that said, don't feed the ducks or the geese. Your little cocktail trivia for the night is Canada geese can poop 28 times a day, which is quite a lot. Those of you that have geese problems on your lake know that they leave a mess on the shoreline, and those waste products are loaded with nutrients. So they get a lot of nutrients out of the lake, but feeding them will only add more nutrients to their diet and contribute to the lake as well. So yeah, the more ducks or geese you have, the more they're recycling nutrients. Most of them are a natural part of our lakes and ponds, and we just kind of have to deal with them. But just some of the tips for things like Canada geese: don't have grass all the way down to your lake edge, or don't have a beach all the way down to your lake edge. Plant bushes or shrubs or ground covers, and they don't like that. They won't come up and leave things for you on your lawn. Um, some of the other things you can do is leave shade trees over your lake edge, so that they can't come up and sun themselves. So just these little tips. But yeah, no direct correlation with E. coli blooms that we're seeing, but yeah, the nutrients are definitely the leading cause there.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that's it for this evening. I can't tell you how many people are just, singing your praises here in the chat and saying thank you and what a wonderful resource you are for the state. And I second that. So thank you again for this wonderful education this evening. And hopefully we'll have you back again sometime soon.
Happy to. Thank you all.
Bye, Amy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.